Welcome to part 3 of this webinar on the overview of the Streamlined Contracting with NGOs Contracting Framework. In the first part of this webinar, we looked at the contracting framework and the different documents and tools that form the framework. We went through the government agency agreement and explained what this is and the commitments that agencies and MBIE make when they sign this agreement. In the second part of this webinar, we looked at the framework terms and conditions and how these apply to outcome agreements. We looked at the main sections of the framework terms and conditions and saw what the contractual obligations of agencies and providers are. The final parts of the framework, we're going to look at the decision support tool, the outcome agreement, and the outcome agreement management plan. If you have not already viewed parts 1 and 2, please do so before you view this part. It is important as we cover a lot of terminology and important background and contextual information in these parts. The Decision Support Tool is an Excel-based tool that helps agencies identify and manage risks when they contract with NGOs. Using the tool helps guide the development of the outcome agreement by identifying what the risks are and how they should be managed. It helps agencies develop an outcome agreement and a management plan which reflect the risks related to the services the provider will be delivering. It is designed to be used after an agency has decided to enter into an agreement with a provider, but before the outcome agreement is developed. It is not a suitable tool for selecting a provider through a competitive selection process. To use the Decision Support Tool, you start by assessing potential risk areas. You then identify specific risks, analyse each risk, and identify what you could do to manage or mitigate each one. Examples of managing or mitigating a risk are being very prescriptive in the description of what the provider is to do, paying in arrears rather than advance, increasing the frequency of visits, and monitoring or asking for more detailed reporting from the provider more regularly. Once you've finished, the Decision Support Tool summarizes all the risks and mitigation options you've identified so that you can incorporate these into the outcome agreement and the outcome agreement management plan. The next couple of slides will show you how it works. We appreciate these next slides may be a little difficult to read, but hopefully it's sufficient to give you an idea of what the tool looks like and how it works. If you'd like to have a closer look at the Decision Support Tool, it's available on our procurement website. We'll give you a link to the website at the end of this webinar. First, you input the details of the provider and services you're assessing. At the bottom of the screen, you click Next to continue. Start the risk assessment by assessing 15 areas under 3 main sections: provider, financial, and services. Under the provider heading, pictured here, you assess the provider against some different areas such as performance, reputation, and track record. Simply score using a 0 to 5 scale provided in the tool and capture any comments to support your scores. You can use the evidence guide as a prompt for information sources to support your assessment. Financial assessment is the value of the contract, and under services, we look at the complexity and importance of the services that will be delivered. For example, are they new, or is there a high level of public interest that might influence the frequency and detail of reporting? Again, here you score using a 0 to 5 scale provided in the tool. This next screen provides a graphical output of your scoring. Assessment areas that scored 3 are flagged orange, with scores of 0 to 2 flagged in red. These flagged areas should be the focus of your risk assessment, which is the next stage. Now that you've identified your risk areas, you need to look at each one in more detail and decide the level of risk, if any, and how to manage or mitigate it. For each specific risk you identify, select the likelihood of it happening again, assign an impact and a risk rating, and then document how you will manage or mitigate it. You can add additional risk into this section if you like. Once you've completed the risk assessment, click Finish to get the summary screen. As you can see, the final summary screen shows the different risks for each area and the mitigation and management options you have identified. Use this information to develop the outcome agreement with the provider, as well as raise any issues or areas of concern before the services start. We encourage agencies to share the results of their assessment with their providers to show them where the agency perceives there to be a risk and how it is proposed to address it. Sharing it and discussing the results with the provider should also make for a more open and hopefully more trusting relationship between the agency and the provider. The Decision Support Tool is an Excel-based tool designed to help agencies identify and manage risks when they contract with NGOs. Using this tool will help agencies to be more consistent in how they deal with risks and will guide the development of the outcome agreement. It starts by assessing risk areas, identifying specific risks, and then moves on to developing mitigation and management options. The Decision Support Tool is designed to be used after an agency has decided to enter into an agreement with a provider, but before the outcome agreement is developed. It is not a suitable tool for selecting a provider through a competitive selection process. That's an overview of the Decision Support Tool. Let's move on to the outcome agreement. The outcome agreement is the contractual document between the agency and the provider that describes the specific services being purchased, payments, reporting, and other requirements to do with the delivery of the services. The framework terms and conditions apply to all outcome agreements, and they're incorporated by reference. The outcome agreement provides the flexibility to tailor the base position taken in the framework terms and conditions to suit the particular circumstances of any contracting agreement. There are two versions of the outcome agreement. A version for use when there is one agency party to the outcome agreement, and a version for use when there are multiple agencies party to the outcome agreement. Both use an appendix system to document the flexible parts of the outcome agreement. The outcome agreement is made up of three main parts. The first part is an introduction that references the framework terms and conditions and explains what happens if there are more than one agency party to the agreement. The second part is the sections you complete with the particular details relevant for each engagement with the provider. Most of these details are recorded in a series of appendices. For example, the services to be provided will be described in Appendix 1, payment in Appendix 2, and reporting in Appendix 3, and so on. The third part of the agreement is the last page of the main body of the document, which is where the agreement is signed. This webinar will look at the parts of the outcome agreement that you will need to fill in. But before we look at the parts of the outcome agreement that you complete, let's look at what happens if more than one agency is party to the outcome agreement. If there is more than one agency, they can only exercise their own rights under the agreement. Agencies cannot represent each other or make decisions for each other. Each agency can only make decisions about the specific part of the outcome agreement that relates to them. For example, conditions or incentives that refer to just one of the agencies can't be enforced by the others. If one agency does something or asks the provider to do something that conflicts with what another agency is doing or asking for, then the provider needs to tell them that there is a problem. Until the issue is resolved, the provider carries on delivering services as usual. As you may recall from the discussion of the framework terms and conditions and the government agency agreement, agencies should be taking a consistent approach to working with a provider and should be working together collaboratively, which means these type of conflicts should be rare. The first part of the outcome agreement that you complete is the start and end dates. Then you need to describe the services that the provider will deliver under the agreement. A table is provided in the template for you to fill in. Describe the service and a performance measure. You also need to state the outcome that will be achieved by delivering the services. You can include more information in this section by formatting the table to add rows and columns if you wish. You'll see from some of these tables and later slides that not every field in the tables must be completed, and there is flexibility to tailor the information to suit both the agency and provider. The mandatory fields are marked with an asterisk. In the payments table, you need to put the amounts the provider will be paid and when. If there are any conditions that the provider must meet to qualify for payment, you need to make sure that these are also added. In the reporting section, you put what reports the provider must provide. For each report, you say what needs to be included and how frequently or when it's required. Next, the monitoring section says what monitoring the agency will do and when. In the audit section, you put what regular audits may be undertaken. These are audits that are required by law. For each audit, you say what the audit is and the legal requirement is, and when it is expected to be carried out. In the conditions section, you can add any extra conditions that you want the provider to meet. We already saw that an example of a condition could be having CYF approval. You should only add any conditions that are absolutely necessary and critical to the successful delivery of the services. Making that assessment about what additional conditions are necessary should be informed by the use of the decision support tool. For each condition, insert the consequences if it's not complied with. These could be the standard consequences available in the FTC or a specific consequence you may wish to include here. Again, any non-standard consequences should be discussed and agreed by the parties before the outcome agreement is entered. You also need to give the provider a deadline for meeting the condition. Here is your option to include incentives. An example of an incentive used earlier was a longer contract term if the provider delivers the services well. If there are any incentives, you need to say what criteria must be met for the incentive to be provided. This table is used if you want to agree other circumstances beyond those in the FTC when disclosing confidential information is okay. It's important to note that this can never be someone's personal information. Under New Intellectual Property, record here who owns any IP that is developed while the services are being delivered. If you want to agree to a different arrangement to what is in the framework terms and conditions, then you document that here. For each new IP right, you need to say who owns it. Remember that whoever owns it agrees to license it to the other party. This table is used to agree any further terms and conditions that the agency and provider have discussed and agreed are necessary to address a matter that is both novel and specific to the provider or services, and which, for clearly identified reasons, is not otherwise adequately or appropriately provided for in the framework terms and conditions. The last part of the outcome agreement that you complete is the contact details for the relationship managers. All information, including postal address, physical address, and full contact details must be provided. And finally, the agreement is signed on the last page. To recap, the outcome agreement is the agreement about the services the provider will deliver. It is legally binding between the agency and the provider. The framework terms and conditions are incorporated by reference. Each outcome agreement needs to be completed with the details of the services to be provided, reports, monitoring, audits, payments, and any other specific requirements. You can also add conditions and incentives, and you can document agreements about how confidential information and intellectual property will be dealt with, and any further terms both parties require and agree. That's the outcome agreement. The last part of the contracting framework that we're going to look at is the Outcome Agreement Management Plan. The Outcome Agreement Management Plan is a contract management tool which is designed to be used once the outcome agreement is in place. Using the Outcome Agreement Management Plan is optional. Agencies don't have to use it, but it's strongly encouraged, especially for large or complex outcome agreements. Having an outcome agreement management plan is good practice because it helps both parties understand their obligations and helps them be clear about how they will work together and solve any problems that might arise. The outcomes are much more likely to be delivered well if there is an agreed plan about how the services will be delivered and how the relationship will be managed. The Outcome Agreement Management Plan is not legally binding. It's an agreement about how the agency and provider will work together. The template can be tailored to meet your needs. If there is a section you don't need, simply take it out. On the other hand, if you need to add more information into the plan, you're welcome to do so. The Outcome Agreement Management Plan is made up of 4 main sections. Section 1 is the purpose and overview. This is mostly standard wording and some information about the services. Section 2 is about how the agency and provider will work together and the kind of relationship that they will have. Section 3 is about managing delivery of services and includes information about the services that will be provided and the results that will be achieved, also known as the results-based accountability information. Section 4 is about how the contract will be administered and how and when payments will be made. The majority of this first section provides standard general information about what the Outcome Agreement Management Plan is and what it's used for. You add a description of the services, some information about the background to the agreement, and a summary of the key details. It's important that the information in this section matches what is in the outcome agreement. Often contract managers will hand over contracts partway through their contract life, so the context and background you add into this section is particularly useful for capturing some of their background knowledge and understanding, which is so important for effective contract management. The second section describes the relationship the agency and provider will aim to have. You add the kind of relationship you want to have with each other. For example, will it be a close, long-term relationship or more of a short-term arrangement? You also add the contact details for both the provider and agency and information about meetings and any other protocols for how they will work together. The third section is about service delivery management. It includes information from the outcome agreement about the services that will be provided and the results that will be achieved. You add a description of the services, the results-based accountability information based on what's in the outcome agreement, and the reporting, monitoring and audit requirements. Remember that these will be informed by the DST. If you've included incentives in the outcome agreement, you also need to add those here and describe what conditions the provider needs to meet to be eligible for the incentives. The last section of the Outcome Agreement Management Plan is about contract administration. In here you add details of the payments that will be made, how much and when, payment procedures and whether the provider has to meet any preconditions for payment, and any management reporting requirements. To recap, the Outcome Agreement Management Plan is a contract management plan. Using it is optional but strongly recommended. Using the Outcome Agreement Management Plan helps both the agency and provider be clear about their obligations and comply with the outcome agreement. It should be tailored for the services, and the information in the plan needs to match what's in the outcome agreement. The Outcome Agreement Management Plan covers the three main areas of contract management, which are how the relationship will be managed, how the services will be managed, and how the contract will be administered. That's the Outcome Agreement Management Plan. So, we've looked at all 5 parts of the contracting framework. Hopefully this webinar has helped explain what each one is and how it's used. To recap, the Government Agency Agreement is the agreement between government agencies and MBIE. It describes how agencies will work together when they contract with NGOs. It's focused on agencies working together to contract with NGOs in a consistent and efficient way. The framework terms and conditions are the standard terms and conditions that apply to outcome agreements between government agencies and providers. The Decision Support Tool is an Excel-based tool that helps agencies identify and manage risks in a consistent way when they contract with NGOs. The outcome agreement is the agreement between the purchasing agency and the provider about the services that will be delivered. It covers things that are specific to the services, such as outcomes, payment and reporting. The Outcome Agreement Management Plan is an optional contract management plan. Together, they form the contracting framework. The Government Agency Agreement and Framework Terms and Conditions are overarching terms and conditions that will only be updated from time to time. You shouldn't need to refer to these very often, and MBIE will be responsible for keeping them updated. In your day-to-day work, you will be mostly using the Decision Support Tool to help you develop the Outcome Agreement and the Outcome Agreement Management Plan. You'll be using the Outcome and Outcome Agreement Management Plan to document what services the provider will provide and how the agreement will be managed. The contracting framework is all about agencies collaborating with each other and working together so that they are more consistent when they contract with NGOs. Agencies all using the framework tools and templates will go a long way to achieving this goal, but as we've seen, the tools and templates themselves also commit agencies to work together and allow agencies to share information, coordinate and align reporting and audit requirements, as well as be part of the same agreement with a provider. This all encourages better collaboration and standardisation of the government's approach to contracting with NGOs. Having standard framework terms and conditions for each outcome agreement means that both the agency and provider are clear about their obligations every time they contract for services. This reduces the time and cost of contracting and aligns government agencies' requirements of providers. The outcome agreement and the management plan are focused on the outcomes that will be achieved. They can be tailored for the services, but provide a framework to providers and agencies towards good working relationships and great outcomes for New Zealanders. That brings us to the close of this webinar. If you'd like to find out more about the Streamlined Contracting with NGOs project, you may like to look at the project overview presentation on our website. For agency personnel, there will also be a half-day training course on using the contracting framework, where we will spend a little more time on a number of the components.